She chose him. Out of every vampire clan standing beneath the blood moon, out of every powerful lord whose name alone could make kingdoms surrender, she chose the one every noble child had been taught to pity. The moment her knees touched the stone before the Ashborn Clan, laughter erupted across the sacred arena. It rolled through the crowd like thunder, growing louder with every passing second. Noble women covered their mouths as they laughed. Warriors shook their heads in disbelief. Even elders who had witnessed centuries of history could not hide their disappointment. Her father lowered his head, unable to bear the shame. Her stepmother looked as though she had been struck across the face. Her stepsister smiled with such satisfaction that she did not even try to conceal it. Everyone believed they had just witnessed the greatest mistake ever made at a blood moon ceremony. No one noticed that the leader of the forgotten Ashborn clan never looked embarrassed. He simply stared at the young woman before him with calm, unreadable eyes, as though he had been waiting for this exact moment for hundreds of years. The laughter refused to stop. It echoed against the towering black pillars surrounding the sacred altar until even the ravens circling high above took flight. Every noble house had gathered to witness the most important tradition in vampire history. Once every generation, under the light of the blood moon, daughters born into noble bloodlines were given the freedom to choose the clan they wished to join through the ancient mate bond. It was more than a marriage. It was a sacred union capable of strengthening bloodlines, expanding territories, and deciding which clans would dominate the next century. Families spent decades preparing for this single night. Alliances were negotiated years in advance. Wealth, influence, and military strength were all measured by the choices made beneath the crimson moon. That was why nobody could understand why the daughter of the prestigious House Valkyris had ignored every celebrated clan in the kingdom to kneel before the one family every child mocked in bedtime stories. The Ashborn clan had become a symbol of failure. Their castle was said to be crumbling. Their warriors were rumored to be too weak to protect even their own borders. Their once famous bloodline had almost vanished from history. To choose them willingly was considered social suicide. Her father stood frozen among the highest-ranking nobles, his face drained of every trace of color. Moments earlier, he had imagined this ceremony ending with cheers as his daughter strengthened their family's influence by joining one of the ruling clans. Instead, whispers rushed through the audience faster than wildfire. Some accused her of losing her senses. Others believed she had secretly fallen in love with a common soldier from the disgraced clan. A few even suggested dark magic had clouded her judgment before the ceremony began. Her stepmother refused to look at her. She stared toward the royal platform instead, hoping the vampire king would somehow cancel the bond before it became permanent. Standing only a few steps away, her stepsister basked in the attention she had already received after proudly choosing the Crimson Fang clan. Warriors applauded her decision. Noble women praised her intelligence. Young vampires admired her ambition. Compared to the humiliation unfolding beside her, she appeared every bit the perfect daughter. The contrast could not have been greater, and she enjoyed every second of it. Engage in our comment section and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Drop your location below. And subscribe now so you never miss any of our new videos. The ceremony itself had followed tradition perfectly until that final choice. 7 clan leaders stood beneath towering banners embroidered with symbols known across the continent. The Crimson Fang clan represented military supremacy. The Night Reapers controlled intelligence networks that stretched beyond vampire territories into distant human kingdoms. The Moon Sovereigns possessed unimaginable wealth and ancient influence over vampire law. The Iron Veil guarded the kingdom's borders. The Obsidian Court produced scholars whose knowledge shaped centuries of history. The Thorn Covenant mastered forbidden blood magic that few dared study openly. Then there was the Ashborn clan. Their faded banner barely moved in the wind. Their black armor carried no jewels, no polished silver, no symbols of victory. Their small delegation stood quietly at the far end of the ceremonial platform, as though they already expected no one would approach them. While every other clan displayed confidence and pride, the Ashborn simply waited in silence. As each noble daughter made her choice, the crowd celebrated exactly as expected. Cheers erupted when powerful alliances were formed. Families embraced one another. Clan leaders welcomed their future mates with respectful bows. The atmosphere resembled a grand festival where every smile carried political significance. Yet hidden beneath the celebrations were countless calculations. Every noble understood that love rarely decided these unions. Strength did. Prestige did. Survival did. Nobody wanted to bind themselves to weakness because weakness invited conquest. Every choice made before the blood moon affected generations still unborn. That was why the arena fell into stunned silence when the final daughter refused every expectation placed upon her. Without hesitation, she walked beyond the glorious banners that represented wealth and military might. She passed warriors whose armor gleamed beneath crimson moonlight. She ignored lords whose names inspired fear across continents. Step after step, she continued toward the forgotten clan standing almost alone near the edge of the platform. Some believed she would stop before reaching them. Others assumed she had simply lost her way. Then she knelt before the Ashborn leader, lowering her head in complete acceptance of the ancient bond. A wave of disbelief swept across the gathering. Nobles who had spent centuries protecting their reputations openly laughed. Young warriors pointed toward the Ashborn delegation with mocking smiles. Even servants struggled to hide their amusement. Her father's closest allies quietly stepped away from him, unwilling to be associated with such public humiliation. Several clan leaders exchanged amused glances as though witnessing an entertaining performance rather than one of the kingdom's oldest traditions. Her stepmother finally found her voice. Though she stood too far away for the entire arena to hear, those closest caught every bitter word she whispered. She called her ungrateful. She called her foolish. She accused her of destroying generations of honor in a matter of seconds. Her stepsister needed no words at all. The satisfaction shining across her face spoke louder than any insult. She believed she had won. She believed every dream she ever held had finally come true because from this moment onward, everyone would compare the brilliant daughter who chose greatness with the pitiful daughter who embraced failure. Yet amid the endless laughter, one detail escaped nearly every pair of eyes in the arena. The Ashborn leader never once reacted to the insults surrounding him. His expression remained calm, almost thoughtful. While nobles mocked him openly, he looked only at the young woman kneeling before him. It was not the gaze of a man surprised by unexpected fortune. It was the gaze of someone recognizing a promise fulfilled after centuries of waiting. His pale hand slowly reached toward hers. He did not rush. He did not celebrate. He simply extended his fingers with absolute certainty, as though the outcome had never been in doubt. The instant their hands touched, the ancient altar beneath them released a faint pulse that rippled through the stone. It was so brief that most dismissed it as imagination. But a handful of the oldest vampires present lifted their heads immediately. Their expressions changed. The amusement vanished from their faces. Something they had not witnessed in generations had just awakened beneath the blood moon, and for the first time that evening, a feeling far stronger than laughter settled over the sacred arena. The ripple vanished almost as quickly as it appeared, leaving most of the audience convinced nothing unusual had happened. The laughter returned even louder than before, swallowing the brief moment that had unsettled the oldest vampires in attendance. One noble lord even raised his glass in mock celebration, congratulating the Ashborn clan for finally finding someone willing to join their dying bloodline. Others followed with cruel applause. The insults became sharper with every passing second. Some called the young woman blind. Others questioned whether she deserved to carry the noble name she had been born into. Every word echoed through the sacred grounds while she remained kneeling before the Ashborn leader without a single trace of regret on her face. She had expected disappointment from her family, but she had never imagined the entire kingdom would celebrate her humiliation. Even so, she never looked back toward the people who had spent years measuring her worth by power and status. Her eyes remained fixed on the quiet vampire standing before her, and the strange sense of peace she felt in his presence only grew stronger. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The noise around them faded. The mocking voices became distant. For reasons she could not explain, she felt as though she had finally arrived exactly where she was always meant to be. The Ashborn leader slowly helped her to her feet. His movements carried the calm confidence of someone who answered to no one, despite standing before an audience that considered him powerless. His black ceremonial robes moved gently beneath the blood moon as he looked into her eyes for several long seconds without speaking. The silence between them felt heavier than every insult shouted across the arena. Finally, he lifted her hand and placed a respectful kiss upon her knuckles. The simple gesture shocked many watching. There was no desperation in his actions, no excitement over finally gaining a mate after years of rejection. Instead, there was dignity, gratitude, and an ancient familiarity that made several elders exchange uneasy glances. Then he spoke only 6 words, quietly enough that very few standing nearby could hear them. "You have remembered what others forgot." The young woman frowned slightly. She did not understand what he meant. She had never met this vampire before today, yet something about his voice stirred memories that did not belong to her. It felt less like hearing a stranger and more like recognizing someone she had searched for her entire life without ever knowing it. Her father could no longer contain his anger. Ignoring every custom that demanded silence during the completion of the mate bond, he stepped forward before the royal court. His voice thundered across the sacred grounds as he publicly disowned his own daughter. Gasps spread through the crowd. Such a declaration during the blood moon ceremony had almost never happened in recorded history. He accused her of disgracing their ancestors, destroying the reputation of House Valkyries, and throwing away centuries of carefully built alliances. He demanded she withdraw her choice immediately before the ancient bond became irreversible. His words were filled with desperation disguised as authority. He believed she still had time to correct what he called the greatest mistake of her life. Her stepmother eagerly supported him, insisting the ceremony should be stopped before the kingdom witnessed an embarrassment that future generations would remember forever. Even her stepsister stepped forward with false sympathy, offering to help her reconsider while secretly enjoying every moment of the spectacle. She spoke softly enough to appear compassionate, yet every sentence carried hidden mockery. She reminded her that powerful clans offered wealth beyond imagination, influence across kingdoms, and protection against every enemy. Why would anyone willingly exchange that future for life among beggars hiding inside forgotten ruins? The young woman finally turned toward her family. For a brief moment, hope appeared in their eyes. They believed she was about to apologize. They expected tears, regret, perhaps even a desperate plea for forgiveness. Instead, she offered them the same calm expression she had shown since entering the sacred altar. She thanked her father for raising her to believe that honor mattered more than appearances. She thanked him for teaching her that true strength should never fear ridicule. Then she quietly admitted something that stunned him into complete silence. She said she had simply followed the values he himself had once taught her before power changed everything. Those words struck harder than any insult. Her father's face tightened, unable to answer. Deep inside, memories he had buried years earlier returned all at once. He remembered being a young warrior who once believed character outweighed titles. He remembered making promises to protect justice before politics consumed his ambition. For the first time that evening, doubt entered his heart. It lasted only a moment before pride forced him to bury it again beneath anger. Across the ceremonial grounds, the vampire king remained seated upon his obsidian throne, saying nothing. Every noble occasionally glanced toward him, waiting for some sign that he intended to intervene. His authority alone could suspend the ceremony if he believed tradition had been violated. Yet he remained completely still. His crimson eyes never left the Ashborn leader. Those standing closest to the throne noticed something unusual. The king's fingers tightened slightly against the carved armrest. It was such a small movement that few recognized its significance. Only the royal advisor standing beside him understood. In more than 3 centuries of serving the throne, he had never seen the vampire king display even the slightest hint of uncertainty. Yet now, beneath the crimson moon, he appeared to be studying the leader of the forgotten clan with careful attention rather than pity. The advisor leaned closer and quietly asked whether the ceremony should continue. The king answered with only 3 words. "Let destiny finish." No explanation followed. The advisor stepped back without another question, though unease settled deep within him. Whatever the king had noticed, it was enough to keep him from interfering. While attention remained focused upon the argument between the noble family and their daughter, another event unfolded almost unnoticed at the edge of the arena. The oldest historian serving the royal archives slowly rose from his seat. His hands trembled so violently that an ancient scroll slipped from his grasp onto the stone floor. He stared toward the Ashborn leader with wide eyes filled not with fear, but recognition. He had spent nearly 600 years studying forgotten records hidden beneath the royal library. He had devoted his existence to translating faded manuscripts dismissed as myths by younger scholars. Throughout those centuries, one symbol appeared repeatedly inside texts that no longer existed anywhere else in the kingdom. It was an ancient crest believed to belong to the first royal bloodline, a clan historians claimed had vanished long before the modern vampire kingdoms were founded. As the Ashborn leader adjusted the sleeve of his robe while helping his mate stand beside him, that same forgotten crest briefly became visible near his wrist. It disappeared almost immediately beneath the fabric again. No one else seemed to notice. The historian's breathing became uneven. He whispered a sentence so quietly that only he could hear it. "The first blood still lives." Before the old scholar could speak another word, a sharp gust of wind swept across the ceremonial grounds. The crimson flames surrounding the sacred altar flickered violently. High above, the blood moon darkened for a heartbeat before glowing brighter than anyone had ever witnessed. Every vampire instinctively looked toward the sky. Then it happened. A single drop of crimson light fell from the moon itself and landed directly between the Ashborn leader and his newly chosen mate. The sacred stone beneath their feet cracked with a sound that echoed across the entire kingdom. The laughter stopped instantly. Warriors reached for their weapons. Clan leaders stood from their seats. Even the vampire king slowly rose to his feet. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Every eye remained fixed upon the widening crack spreading across the ancient altar, while deep beneath the mountain, something that had slept for countless centuries finally opened its eyes. The crack spread across the sacred altar with a deep, ancient roar that silenced every living soul beneath the blood moon. It was unlike the sound of breaking stone. It resembled the awakening of something that had been buried beneath the kingdom long before the first castle was built. Dust rose into the air as crimson light escaped through the widening fracture, wrapping itself around the young woman and the Ashborn leader like living threads. Every vampire present instinctively stepped backward. Even the proud warriors of the Ashborn Clan, whose courage had become legendary across continents, hesitated. Nobody understood what they were witnessing because no ceremony recorded in vampire history had ever produced such a reaction. The royal guards immediately surrounded the altar, believing an ancient curse had been triggered. Noble families pulled their children behind them. Some whispered desperate prayers to forgotten ancestors while others begged the vampire king to end the ceremony before disaster consumed them all. Yet the king remained perfectly still, watching every second unfold with an expression that no one could read. His silence frightened the crowd far more than the cracking altar itself. The crimson light continued circling the pair before slowly fading into the stone beneath their feet. As suddenly as it had begun, the trembling stopped. The altar became still once again. The frightened nobles exchanged confused glances before relief slowly returned to their faces. Some nervously laughed, convincing themselves it had been nothing more than an unusual reaction caused by the blood moon. The cruel remarks soon returned. They mocked the Ashborn clan for creating unnecessary drama during a sacred ceremony. They joked that even the altar itself had protested against such a foolish union. The stepsister wasted no opportunity to humiliate her rival further. Standing proudly beside the heir of the Ashborn clan, she announced loud enough for nearby nobles to hear that perhaps the ancient stone had cracked from the weight of such terrible judgment. Her words were met with laughter once again. She basked in the attention, believing fate itself had proven she had made the superior choice. Her fiancé smiled proudly beside her, enjoying every insult thrown toward the forgotten clan. Neither of them noticed that several elderly council members had quietly left their seats and were whispering among themselves with growing concern. The old royal historian could barely remain standing. His hands trembled as he searched desperately through the scroll that had fallen moments earlier. The faded parchment contained fragments of a prophecy almost every scholar had dismissed as fantasy. He scanned each worn sentence repeatedly until his eyes settled upon a passage he had translated decades earlier but never fully understood. It spoke of a blood moon unlike any before it. It described a forgotten bloodline returning through the choice of a woman untouched by greed. It warned that the ancient throne would awaken only when truth was chosen over power. The historian's breathing became heavy. Every event unfolding before him matched the forgotten text with frightening precision. He looked toward the vampire king, hoping to warn him immediately, only to discover that the king's attention had never once left the Ashborn leader. That realization unsettled him even more. If the king already knew what the prophecy meant, then why had he allowed the ceremony to continue? What secret had been hidden from the entire kingdom for generations? The questions multiplied faster than answers could be found. Far beneath the sacred mountain, hidden behind walls no living vampire remembered existed, chains forged before recorded history began to vibrate one after another. Massive stone doors covered with ancient runes slowly released centuries of dust. Crimson flames burned along carvings that had remained dark for nearly 2,000 years. The enormous chamber beyond them had been sealed by 7 royal bloodlines working together to erase its existence from history. No maps marked its location. No records described its purpose. Yet now, as the mate bond completed itself above, the forgotten sanctuary stirred to life. Rows of colossal statues lining the chamber opened their stone eyes simultaneously. Their gaze fixed upon a black throne standing at the center of the hall. The throne had remained empty since the disappearance of the first bloodline. Above it hung an ancient crown unlike any worn by the modern kings. Its black crystal jewels reflected the crimson light filtering through the ceiling as though recognizing the return of someone it had awaited for centuries. Without warning, the chamber echoed with the low heartbeat of something awakening, each pulse stronger than the last. Completely unaware of the events beneath the mountain, the young woman finally stood beside her chosen mate as the ceremony reached its conclusion. According to ancient tradition, once both accepted the mate bond, they were to leave the sacred grounds together before sunrise. It symbolized leaving behind one life to begin another. She turned once more toward the family she had known all her life, hoping at least one person might offer a final farewell. Instead, her father looked away without speaking. Her stepmother folded her arms, refusing to acknowledge her existence. The servants who had once bowed before her now avoided meeting her eyes, fearful that showing kindness to someone joining the Ashborn clan might damage their own reputations. Only her stepsister stepped closer. A faint smile rested upon her lips, but there was no warmth behind it. She leaned toward her just enough that nobody else could hear. In a soft voice, she said she hoped the ruined Ashborn castle had enough blankets to survive the coming winter because everyone knew the forgotten clan could barely feed its own people. Then she added one final sentence that lingered painfully in the young woman's heart. She said, "When you realize you've thrown your life away, don't come begging to our door. We buried your place in this family the moment you knelt before him." The words hurt more than she expected, not because she believed them, but because they came from someone she had once loved like a sister. She had endured years of subtle insults, unfair comparisons, and quiet humiliation within her own home, yet she had continued hoping things would one day change. Standing beneath the blood moon, she finally understood they never would. She gently released the last emotional ties connecting her to the family standing behind her. Without anger or tears, she turned away for the final time. The Ashborn leader noticed the quiet sadness she tried to hide. He said nothing. Instead, he removed the dark cloak resting across his shoulders and carefully placed it around her. The gesture surprised her. It was warm despite the cold night air, carrying a faint scent of cedar, rain, and ancient forests. For reasons she could not explain, the moment the cloak settled around her shoulders, an overwhelming feeling of safety replaced every ounce of fear she had carried into the ceremony. She looked up at him, searching for answers, but found only calm certainty in his golden eyes. As they descended the long stone staircase leading away from the sacred altar, the crowd continued watching in silence. Some laughed quietly among themselves, already imagining the miserable future awaiting the newest member of the Ashborn clan. Others pitied her, believing she had sacrificed comfort and prestige for a life of hardship. None of them noticed that the Ashborn warriors walking behind their leader moved with extraordinary discipline. They marched without arrogance, their footsteps perfectly synchronized despite their worn armor and simple appearance. Hidden beneath weathered cloaks were swords unlike any forged in the modern kingdom. Their black blades absorbed the moonlight instead of reflecting it. Every movement they made carried the precision of elite warriors rather than forgotten outcasts. High above the procession, ravens circled silently before changing direction all at once, following the Ashborn clan as though guided by an invisible command. Several elderly vampires witnessed the strange behavior and quietly crossed ancient protective symbols over their chests. Old instincts told them something long forgotten had begun returning to the world. The procession had barely reached the edge of the sacred valley when an exhausted royal messenger came racing toward the ceremonial grounds on horseback. His horse collapsed the instant it stopped before the Vampire King, its body trembling from complete exhaustion. The messenger stumbled forward, dropping to one knee as he struggled to catch his breath. Every noble turned toward him. Whatever news had driven a royal courier to interrupt the blood moon ceremony had to be serious. His voice shook as he delivered his report. 3 border fortresses belonging to the kingdom had vanished within a single hour. Entire garrisons had disappeared without a trace. No bodies had been found. No signs of battle remained. The only thing left behind at every fortress was the same ancient symbol burned into the stone gates, a black crown surrounded by 7 crimson stars. The moment the old historian heard those words, the scroll slipped from his hands once again. He looked toward the distant figures of the Ashborn clan disappearing into the darkness and whispered with growing terror, "They haven't returned to reclaim a forgotten clan. They've returned to reclaim an empire." The words spoken by the royal messenger spread through the gathering faster than the cold wind sweeping across the valley. The laughter that had filled the blood moon ceremony only minutes earlier disappeared completely. Nobles who had mocked the Ashborn clan now looked at one another with growing uncertainty. 3 border fortresses did not simply vanish. Those strongholds had protected the kingdom for centuries. Each one housed thousands of elite vampire soldiers, commanders who had survived countless wars, and blood wards believed to be impossible to break. If they had truly disappeared without leaving behind broken walls, scattered weapons, or even a single body, then whatever force had reached them possessed power beyond anything the kingdom had prepared for. The messenger remained on one knee, still struggling to breathe as he described what little his scouts had managed to discover. Entire mountains surrounding the fortresses had become strangely silent. Forests once filled with predators now stood empty. Rivers flowing beside the strongholds had turned as dark as polished obsidian, reflecting the moonlight like mirrors. Every survivor who approached the abandoned lands claimed to hear distant footsteps, yet no one could be seen. It was as though an invisible army had walked through the region and erased every trace of life before disappearing into the darkness. The Vampire King slowly descended from his throne for the first time since the ceremony had begun. Every noble instinctively stepped aside, creating a clear path before him. No one dared interrupt his thoughts. For centuries, he had ruled with calm authority, never allowing panic to influence his decisions. Yet tonight, even he appeared unusually thoughtful. He approached the royal historian and quietly asked for the ancient scroll. The old scholar's hands shook as he presented the worn parchment. The king studied the faded writing in complete silence before rolling it closed once again. Then he asked a question that stunned everyone standing close enough to hear. "Has anyone outside the royal archives ever seen this prophecy?" The historian immediately shook his head. He explained that generations of kings had ordered every copy destroyed because they believed the prophecy encouraged dangerous legends capable of dividing the kingdom. Only one incomplete version had survived inside the deepest chamber of the royal library. The king's expression remained unreadable. Then perhaps, he replied softly, destroying history was the greatest mistake our ancestors ever made. Those nearby exchanged uneasy glances. None of them understood why the king suddenly spoke of forgotten prophecies while the kingdom itself faced an unknown threat. Meanwhile, the Ashborn procession continued its journey through the ancient forest without once looking back toward the ceremony. The young woman walked beside her mate beneath towering black pines whose branches stretched so high they nearly concealed the crimson moon. She expected the road leading toward the Ashborn lands to match every terrible rumor she had heard throughout her childhood. She imagined abandoned villages, starving families, broken walls, and endless signs of poverty. Instead, she noticed something strange. The deeper they traveled into the forest, the healthier everything became. Trees that should have withered centuries ago stood taller than cathedral towers. Flowers unlike any she had ever seen bloomed beneath the moonlight, filling the air with a gentle fragrance that calmed her racing thoughts. Crystal-clear streams crossed the narrow path, untouched by pollution or decay. Even the silence felt different here. It was peaceful rather than empty. The stories told about the Ashborn territory suddenly seemed difficult to believe. If this clan truly lived in misery, why did their land appear untouched by time itself? She finally gathered enough courage to ask the question that had remained in her heart since the ceremony. She asked why he had never defended his clan against the endless insults. She asked why he had allowed an entire kingdom to believe the Ashborn were weak when even a blind person could sense there was something extraordinary surrounding them. The Ashborn leader smiled faintly but kept his eyes on the road ahead. After a long silence, he answered in a voice so calm it almost blended with the wind. Because power that demands attention eventually attracts those who wish to steal it. Power that remains hidden survives. His words lingered in her thoughts long after he stopped speaking. She realized he had never once complained about the humiliation he endured. He carried no bitterness toward the people who mocked him. Instead, he behaved like a man who had already seen kingdoms rise and fall, knowing that pride often destroyed those who embraced it. The more time she spent beside him, the more impossible it became to believe the stories told about the Ashborn clan. There was wisdom in every sentence he spoke, patience in every step he took, and an unshakable confidence that could not be faked. Hours later, the forest suddenly ended, and she froze where she stood. Before her stretched what appeared to be the ruins of an enormous fortress resting against the side of a mountain. Broken towers leaned dangerously toward the sky. Cracked stone walls surrounded the abandoned structure. Vines covered ancient gates that seemed ready to collapse at any moment. The sight matched every rumor she had ever heard, and for the first time since leaving the ceremony, uncertainty crept into her heart. Was everyone right after all? Had she truly abandoned everything for a clan whose glory had vanished long ago? The Ashborn warriors quietly approached the rusted gates without saying a word. Their leader turned toward her and noticed the brief hesitation in her eyes. Rather than reassuring her with empty promises, he simply extended his hand. "Walk with me," he said gently. She placed her hand in his without hesitation. The instant their fingers intertwined, the ground beneath them vibrated. A deep sound echoed across the valley. It resembled dozens of enormous locks turning at the same time. The cracked walls surrounding the fortress began to shimmer beneath the blood moon. The vines covering the gates dissolved into glowing crimson particles before disappearing completely. One by one, the ancient towers straightened as though centuries of decay had never touched them. Broken stone rebuilt itself before her eyes. Massive banners unfurled from the highest battlements, displaying the same black crown surrounded by 7 crimson stars, described by the royal messenger only hours earlier. Hidden pathways illuminated across the mountainside. Waterfalls flowed where barren cliffs had stood moments before. Thousands of golden lights appeared throughout the fortress as windows opened across an enormous city concealed behind a powerful illusion. The young woman stood speechless. The ruined castle the world believed belonged to the weakest vampire clan had never been abandoned. It had simply been hidden from every eye except those worthy of entering. Before she could even process what she was witnessing, the great gates slowly opened. Beyond them stood an empire. Endless streets carved from black crystals stretched toward towering palaces whose rooftops reflected the crimson moon like polished glass. Massive dragons carved into mountain peaks appeared almost alive beneath the glowing light. Elegant bridges connected soaring towers suspended above deep valleys. Rivers of silver flowed through carefully designed gardens where trees shimmered with leaves resembling liquid gold. Thousands upon thousands of vampires lined both sides of the grand avenue leading toward the central palace. Every one of them wore black ceremonial armor, marked with the ancient Ashborn crest. None carried the appearance of poverty or defeat. They stood with flawless discipline, their heads lowered in perfect respect. As the Ashborn leader and his mate crossed the gates together, every warrior, every elder, every child, and every noble inside the hidden kingdom dropped to one knee simultaneously. The unified movement echoed across the valley like rolling thunder. Their voices rose together in one powerful greeting. "Welcome home, our queen." The young woman instinctively looked behind her, believing they must be greeting someone else. There was no one. She turned back toward the kneeling crowd, completely overwhelmed. These people had never met her. They knew nothing about her except the choice she had made beneath the blood moon. Yet every face reflected genuine respect rather than obligation. Tears threatened to fill her eyes as years of rejection from her own family contrasted sharply with the acceptance surrounding her now. Before she could speak, an elderly woman dressed in flowing black robes stepped forward from the crowd. Her silver hair reached her waist, yet her eyes shone with youthful strength. She bowed deeply before the young woman and carefully placed an ancient key made of black crystal into her hands. "My queen," she said with quiet emotion, "we have protected your home until the day you arrived. The first bloodline has waited a very long time for you." The young woman looked toward her mate in complete confusion. He offered only a gentle smile before saying, "Tomorrow, you will learn why the entire kingdom was taught to fear the truth. Tonight, you deserve peace." At that exact moment, far beyond the hidden valley, a hooded figure emerged from the shadows overlooking the Ashborn kingdom. The stranger had witnessed everything. Without speaking a single word, he turned his horse toward the royal capital, carrying news that would ignite a conflict capable of changing the fate of every vampire clan forever. The hooded rider never slowed his horse, not even as the first light of dawn threatened the horizon. He crossed forests, rivers, and abandoned battlefields with only one destination in mind, the royal capital. Before the sun could fully rise, the palace gates were thrown open, and the exhausted messenger demanded an audience with the vampire king. The royal court gathered in silence as he dropped to one knee, his cloak soaked with rain and dust from the long journey. He spoke only one sentence before lowering his head again. "The Ashborn kingdom has awakened." The chamber fell silent. No one laughed this time. No one questioned the report. The fear spreading across the faces of the oldest nobles told the younger generation everything they needed to know. The legends they had dismissed as fairy tales throughout their lives were real. The forgotten clan had never been destroyed. They had simply disappeared from the world by choice. For generations, every history book, every royal lesson, and every noble family had repeated the same story, claiming the Ashborn lost their strength in an ancient war. But those stories had hidden one terrifying truth. The Ashborn had not been defeated. They had walked away from the throne before anyone else could take it from them, disappearing behind powerful illusions while allowing the world to believe they had become weak. It had been the greatest deception in vampire history, and now that deception had come to an end. Inside the hidden kingdom, the young woman spent her first morning exploring the palace that had remained invisible to the outside world for centuries. Everywhere she looked, new wonders greeted her. Vast libraries filled with books older than the modern kingdom stretched farther than the eye could see. Gardens bloomed with flowers believed to have vanished from the world long ago. Crystal fountains flowed with glowing water that carried traces of ancient blood magic. Children ran through the palace grounds laughing without fear, while warriors trained with a level of discipline unmatched by any clan she had ever seen. Nobody treated her like an outsider. Every servant greeted her with sincere respect. Every elder welcomed her warmly. It confused her more than anything else. She had expected suspicion. She had prepared herself to earn their trust over many years. Instead, it seemed they had been expecting her arrival long before she was born. As she walked through one magnificent hallway lined with portraits of ancient rulers, her eyes suddenly stopped on a painting hanging above the grand staircase. The woman in the portrait looked almost identical to her. The same eyes, the same gentle smile. Even the small birthmark near her collarbone had been painted with astonishing accuracy. Yet the portrait was clearly thousands of years old. Before she could gather her thoughts, the Ashborn leader quietly joined her. He followed her gaze toward the portrait before speaking in a calm voice. He explained that the woman in the painting had been the final queen of the first bloodline, the last ruler to sit upon the original vampire throne before history was rewritten. According to ancient records preserved only within the Hidden Kingdom, the queen had sacrificed everything to prevent civil war from destroying their people. Rather than allowing ambitious clans to seize the throne through endless bloodshed, she concealed her kingdom behind powerful enchantments and left behind a prophecy. The prophecy declared that one day, another woman with the same heart would return, not because of royal birth, but because she would choose compassion over power when every voice around her demanded the opposite. The young woman listened without interrupting. Part of her struggled to believe such an extraordinary story. Yet another part remembered the strange sense of familiarity she had felt from the moment she first looked into his eyes beneath the blood moon. She finally asked the question that had remained locked inside her heart since the ceremony. "Did you already know I would choose you?" He remained silent for several moments before answering honestly. "I hoped. But destiny has disappointed me before. Until your hand touched mine at the altar, I wasn't certain this day would ever come." Far away, the royal capital had become a place of fear rather than celebration. News of the hidden Ashborn kingdom spread from house to house despite every attempt to suppress it. Families who had laughed during the ceremony now whispered behind locked doors. Merchants delayed their travels. Soldiers sharpened weapons that suddenly felt inadequate. Several clan leaders secretly met inside the palace, demanding immediate military action before the Ashborn could grow stronger. They argued that allowing the Forgotten Kingdom to reveal itself would eventually threaten every noble family that currently held power. Among those leading the discussion was the proud heir of the Crimson Clan, the very vampire chosen by the young woman's stepsister. His pride had already turned to jealousy. He could not accept that the clan he considered beneath him possessed wealth, discipline, and influence surpassing his own. Rather than admitting the truth, he insisted the Ashborn must have stolen forbidden magic to deceive the kingdom. His arrogance found support among several ambitious nobles eager to protect their positions. They proposed a united assault against the Hidden Kingdom before its influence spread further. The Vampire King listened to every argument without interruption. When they finally finished, he rose slowly from his throne and looked across the chamber. "You wish to wage war against the only clan that never declared war against you," he said quietly. "Tell me, who truly threatens this kingdom?" No one answered. While politics consumed the capital, another tragedy quietly unfolded inside House Valkyris. The stepsister had imagined her future within the Crimson Clan would be filled with admiration, luxury, and endless privilege. Instead, she discovered the truth hidden beneath the clan's glorious reputation. Her husband viewed marriage as nothing more than another political alliance. Every conversation became in order. Every mistake was met with cold criticism. Every smile he offered before the ceremony disappeared behind a mask of superiority. She realized too late that he had never admired her. He admired only the influence her family could provide. The affection she believed she had earned vanished almost overnight. Meanwhile, reports continued arriving from travelers describing the hidden Ashborn kingdom as peaceful, prosperous, and astonishingly beautiful. Each story pierced her heart like a blade. She remembered laughing when her stepsister walked away with the forgotten clan. She remembered mocking the worn cloak placed around her shoulders. Now she found herself staring through palace windows late into the night, wondering whether she had chosen status while someone else had found genuine love. Envy slowly replaced pride, and with every passing day, it grew more difficult to hide. Days later, the young woman and the Ashborn leader climbed together to the highest balcony overlooking the hidden kingdom. The valley below glowed beneath another crimson moon, its lights stretching beyond the horizon like stars scattered across the earth. She thanked him for believing in her when no one else had. He gently corrected her. "You believed first," he said with a warm smile. "I simply trusted your choice." She looked at him for a long moment before asking why he had never taken revenge on those who spent centuries humiliating his people. His answer carried the quiet wisdom that had drawn her toward him from the very beginning. He explained that revenge often satisfied wounded pride, but rarely healed wounded hearts. The Ashborn had hidden themselves not because they feared battle, but because endless conflict would have destroyed innocent lives. Strength, he told her, meant knowing when to fight and when to wait. As he finished speaking, he reached into his robe and removed a small black velvet box. Inside rested a ring unlike anything she had ever seen, forged from black crystal surrounding a single crimson gemstone that shimmered beneath the moonlight. He knelt before her, not as a ruler before his queen, but as a man before the woman he loved. He asked whether she would willingly rule beside him, not through fear, but through compassion, honesty, and courage. Tears filled her eyes as she accepted. He gently placed the ring upon her finger before rising to meet her. Their foreheads touched first, followed by a tender kiss beneath the blood moon, sealing a promise that neither politics nor war could ever break. At that very moment, horns echoed across the distant mountains. Ashborn scouts appeared on the palace walls, their expressions unusually serious. One commander hurried toward the royal balcony and bowed deeply before speaking. United armies from 6 vampire clans had begun marching toward the hidden valley. Thousands of warriors, determined to destroy the Ashborn before the truth spread any further, now advanced beneath banners that once stood proudly together during the blood moon ceremony. The young woman looked toward the horizon, where countless torches flickered like a sea of fire. She expected fear to fill her heart. Instead, she found only calm determination. The Ashborn leader gently took her hand once more and smiled with complete confidence. "Let them come," he said. "For centuries they believed we hid because we were weak. Tomorrow, they will learn we hid because we chose peace." Behind them, the great bells of the hidden kingdom rang across the valley, not as a warning of despair, but as the announcement that the first bloodline had finally returned. And just as the first rays of dawn reached the mountain peaks, every Ashborn warrior transformed before their queen's eyes. Black wings unfolded across the sky. Ancient runes blazed like living fire across their armor. Their eyes glowed with the power of the oldest blood ever created. The forgotten clan the world had mocked stood revealed as the true guardians of vampire history. And everyone who had laughed beneath the blood moon finally understood that the greatest strength is often the strength humble enough to remain unseen until the moment the world needs it most. The kingdom would remember the blood moon ceremony for generations, not as the night a noble daughter ruined her future, but as the night courage chose character over reputation, truth over appearances, and love over ambition. Families who had mocked her taught their children never to judge greatness by worn cloaks or quiet voices. Historians restored the erased chapters of vampire history. The Ashborn reclaimed their rightful place, not by conquering the kingdom, but by revealing the truth that had been buried for centuries. Her father, burdened by regret, came before the gates of the hidden kingdom seeking forgiveness. Her stepmother bowed her head in shame. Her stepsister, broken by the life she had chosen for status alone, finally admitted that power without love was an empty victory. The new queen welcomed them with dignity, proving that mercy could accomplish what vengeance never could. From that day forward, the 7 clans no longer measured greatness by wealth, armies, or ancient titles. They measured it by the courage to see beyond appearances. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson this story leaves behind. If you had stood beneath that blood moon, surrounded by cheering crowds and promises of power, would you have chosen the path everyone admired, or would you have had the courage to choose the one everyone laughed at? Let us know your answer in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe because the next legend may challenge everything you think you know about destiny, loyalty, and love.